I chose anger as my topic. I'm calling this Just What Is Anger? So an angry person is like somebody picking up a hot coal to throw at someone else. Obviously, they get hurt physically, emotionally, psychologically. But the anger itself isn't the problem. This is how I've always seen anger throughout my life, or thought of it as like that hot coal, something really big, hot, something really angry. And if I was angry at someone, that it meant they wronged me, they did something wrong, they were kind of a bad person. And I finally realized that that's only one part of it. So I picked this topic in part because I think anger is kind of confusing, at least it has been for me. Until pretty recently, maybe within the last year, whenever people would talk about the topic of anger would come up, I would often say, I don't really think I get angry very much. And I meant it, and I certainly knew I could be mistaken. And I was aware of the stigma in the society against, in particular, women getting angry, certainly voicing their anger. And sometimes also people would say, well, maybe you're just stuffing it. I don't know. But shortly after that, sometime maybe in the last 6 months, during or after a dokusan with sensei, I realized that irritation is anger. Now, I don't know why it took me so long to realize that, but it did. And I definitely can get irritated. And then, not long after I thought about that, Shoshin, I'm pretty sure it was Shoshin, told us a story of the empty boat. So maybe some of you were here, and after that I read another rendering of that in a little bit different way, but as I recall him telling it to us, there was a man, I think maybe two men, in a rowboat in the morning out fishing on a lake, and it was very foggy. And they really couldn't see much of anything. Just out relaxing and fishing. And then the fog parted enough that they could see another boat coming right at them on a collision course. And then indeed, bam, they did collide. And the man had a very angry reaction. You stupid fool, what are you doing? And on. And then saw that it was an empty boat. There was nobody in it. So that probably sounds a little familiar to some of us. After that, and for me it's often not right after, it can be kind of a delayed thing, but at some point I started noticing in my life these empty boat moments. Not so long ago I was out doing some gardening and yard work, and there's a place where we butt up against the neighbors and share some yard garden space there. And they have a juniper tree with a pretty hefty branch that hangs low. And I was kind of going under it, cleaning up and weeding, and stood up into it and started feeling that really irritated feeling, that, and then, empty boat. Or recently doing the dishes and had put something tall, like a wooden spoon, maybe it was salad tongs, into the utensil holder, and as I was moving around doing the dishes, knocked it on the floor. At least I know now, I start catching myself when I have those empty boat moments. I kind of laugh at myself. Oh, yeah, there's that empty boat. So, but back to what is anger. We know it's one of the three poisons: greed, anger, hatred, or anger, and delusion. So it's pretty bad. The dictionary definition is displeasure at perceived injustice. So again, it's always around. I mean, we talk about it here, the state of the world, and I think everybody has plenty of perceived injustice. But again, it's not the anger that's the problem. It's our being consumed by it. It's our reaction to it. One way of stating the precept against anger is no indulgence in anger. No unskillful reactivity to anger. And that unskillful response, of course, comes from our habituated actions and attitude. Some of you might have heard of the 90-second rule. Some of you might know Jill Bolte Taylor, who's a Harvard neuroscientist. She wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight. It's a fantastic book. She had a stroke as a youngish woman and as a neuroscientist, and she was all alone in her office and going through all of this and knowing exactly what was happening, and then her actually years of a slow recovery when she describes a lot of things that would seem familiar to Zen practitioners. But she states, get it right, when a person has a reaction to something in their environment, there's a 90-second chemical process that happens in the body. After that, any remaining emotional response is just that person choosing to stay in that emotional loop. Again, probably sounds pretty familiar to a lot of us. We have the emotion, which in itself is okay, but then we go to the story. And sometimes we tell the story, and tell the story, and tell the story. How that person is wronging us, and how they're being so stupid, and how we're in the right. So, the second arrow. It's our conditioned way of taking sides against that perceived other. Separation from the other, and we objectify what is outside our perceived small self. So, reacting to protect our ego. The 8th century Buddhist scholar Shantideva described anger as the most extreme negative force, with the capability of destroying the good we've worked so hard to create. So maybe, for instance, someone has this big explosive moment of anger and has access to a gun. And suddenly, instead of a life of freedom, they have a life behind bars. Or something probably easier to relate to is we're with a friend and they say something that really upsets us, angers us, and we react with this horrible anger and perhaps destroy or certainly damage a relationship that's perhaps taken years for us to cultivate. I came across something I really loved when I was preparing for this talk. A 20th century Roshi, Matsuoka, made an analogy of anger as cutting with a sword. He said, having an angry thought is like cutting water, doesn't make a mark really. And then speaking with anger is like cutting in sand. So it can take the wind quite a while to smooth out that mark. And having a very angry reaction would be like cutting stone, or it's forever damaged. So is there anything positive about anger? We've kind of talked about this here before, how having anger can be a catalyst for us to go out and do something positive. We can just to the point of having being compassionate in the world, or joining a demonstration, or joining an organization that's doing good. Poet David White says, the internal living flame of anger always illuminates what we belong to, what we wish to protect, and what we are willing to hazard ourselves for. And in the last Dharma dialogue, Sokyo pointed out that Bernie Glassman had said, that if we remove the selfishness from anger, that all that is left is determination and care. So again, it can be a tool for us if we can just kind of slow down and have a different reaction. We remember that the first noble truth tells us that life is suffering, or whatever word you prefer to use. Dukkha, life is unsatisfactory. And again, reminding us that we'll always have anger. If the definition is that it's our displeasure at perceived injustice, who doesn't often perceive injustice? So being angry isn't going to change that cycle of samsara. People will always do things we don't like, things that anger us, and that tends to be because they're suffering too. So if we remember this, realize this, it can help break that cycle and change the way we react. So how do we skillfully deal with anger? Well, I think first, that 90-second pause. Emotions need to actually move. That's another reason that 90-second rule is important, is if we don't let them move through, they're going to stay there and very likely come up later. And letting the emotion run through our body does not mean thinking about it or analyzing it. It really truly means letting it cycle and just feeling it. Feel however that anger feels in your body. You feel the tightness, the heat, your heart racing. For me, sometimes it's that fight or flight. And that reminds me, I'm going to jump back for a minute. One of the few times that I really remember having that big, huge, to me, classic angry feeling was when I was working as a nurse midwife in Anchorage. And I was in a practice with nurse midwives and doctors, and we had weekly meetings. Actually, it was our weekly executive committee meeting that I sat on. There's a couple doctors, a nurse, one of our financial people. Anyway, the executive director sat on the executive committee. And one day in our meeting, she just said something really insensitive, demeaning about our staff, the staff that sits behind the reception desk and the MAs and the people that keep the place going. And I had such that angry feeling that I knew if I didn't remove myself, it wasn't going to be pretty. So I left the room, and now I know it was probably at least 90 seconds, and so that feeling could go through. I wasn't aware of that at the time. And when I came back, I did say something, and I have no idea if it made any difference, but I do remember that most of the people in the room were in support of me and didn't like what had happened. Okay. So then, after you have that 90 seconds of everything going through you and you sort of regain some calmness, you refrain from going on to the story. Don't start telling yourself how awful it was and just doing all the thinking. If we keep spinning the story and going on about it, feeling sorry for ourselves, seeing them as the other, we're just keeping the wound fresh. Instead, again, remembering that that person who angered you is also suffering. With that realization or that remembrance, we can hopefully stop that reaction and do something different. Do our best to react with compassion. I know most of you are familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh, and I know he would say that you say something like, "My dear, I see you are suffering. I can help." And to me, I love him, And that's too saccharine for me. I couldn't do that kind of words, but whatever it is for you, you know, giving a hug or leaving the room or wanting to hear that person's story, reacting with curiosity, those can all be helpful. And then of course, we keep sitting. Sitting reminds us who we are, reminds us to let go of ego, helps us to learn skillful action instead of reactivity. And speaking of ego, Bodhidharma's words about the anger precept are, self-nature is inconceivably wondrous. In the Dharma of no self, not postulating a self, is called the precept of refraining from anger. So, if there is no self, how can there be anger? And then learn from our anger. Remember, see that person who's angering you as a precious teacher. A woman named Shoshin Victoria Austin, who's with the Beginner's Mind Temple, says that when anger arises, we should practice benefiting ourselves, the subject of our anger, and the space between and around both of us. And something that we might not think of very often, and it isn't something that I've heard or read really in Zen circles, but is that remember we are what we eat. And not just the food that we eat, although that's important, very important, but okay, so being good Zen students, perhaps we don't read or watch things while we're eating. But let's say we're doing that and we're watching the news, we're reading something, it's really violent and really upsetting. We're actually consuming that as we eat with our food. Or if we eat meat and it's an animal that was raised on a factory farm and it was slaughtered very inhumanely, we're probably eating the fear from that animal. So it's just a matter of, not to say that nobody will ever do any of those things, but just being really mindful and probably trying to limit what things that we eat, the things that we are doing as we eat. I'd like to end with another quote. I don't know the exact source. It was listed as 16th century Japanese. But it says, when the wind blows through the bamboo grove, the trunks clatter against one another. When it has passed, the grove is quiet once more.